So you mentioned reform right there. It's really important that we address this now. I think reform has been trying to portray themselves as this patriotic, standing up for values, really sticking up to beliefs, British values, the fact that they're saying they're fading away and they will get them back in a dramatic fight. But actually, over time, what the conservatives stood for is lowering taxes, enabling business, allowing people and country to grow, allowing people to have their income. So why do you think that change happened in people's minds that they now believe reform are standing for these values and not the conservatives?
I mean, I'm sure Oliver has views on this as well, but the reality is that the British public get and the voting choice right every single time. Nobody's in a position to tell the British public they're wrong. And when a political party says to the British public you're wrong, they're going down the wrong route. So I think it's really encouraging that leadership has accepted in the last 14 years there were some things that went wrong. The next step, though, is recognising that the answers are not towards reform. And the problem with the British public at the moment, the British public is finding that they're being disappointed time and time again. I mean, you look at this government, for example, came in on this message of change, came in largely because of the collapse in the Conservative vote that went in large part to reform. But it's deeply disappointing. I mean, even for Labour voters, this government is failing on almost every single measure of success. And I think that level of disappointment makes the public feel so soon after a landslide win that we're all the same. And our challenge is to convince them that we're not, because it's just not true.
Yeah, I would definitely echo a lot of those sentiments. And I think quite bizarrely, actually, this Labour government, when they first came in, I actually had almost a little bit of ray of hope that they would do some of the things that the Conservative government were going to do, sort of rationalising the wage field payments, for example. And I think that was actually a really interesting example for the Labour Party, where they came in, they recognised that there is an issue with public debt, and giving away free money is not an answer to it, especially when it's given to people who are multimillionaires and there's no rationing in no sense. Obviously, you want to be compassionate to people who need it. But then the Labour Party trying to do perhaps a more sensible thing, which would have had the support of many Conservatives, ended up going back to its backbenchers, going back to the sort of hard left, and then sort of U-turning on that. And I think that's an example of the fact that the Labour Party, there are some sensible elements there, but they are held into the more extreme left. And I think that's something which the Conservative Party is more home with. It's more home with its natural voters. I think we need to move back to that area whilst we've been shifting to the middle ground, almost going to some very almost centre-left policies over the last few years. But I think we had to with COVID and sort of furlough payments and things like that. But I think that perhaps giving lots of money away during COVID perhaps gave the impression that we weren't as fiscally responsible as we had traditionally been. And that gave the electorate a slightly different impression, I think, of the last election.
One of the most important things for me or for anybody for that matter who lives or comes in the country of the UK is how things are going to be going in London, because London is the major city for the UK in general, for its growth, and it's really important what's happening in London. And London is currently being governed by Sadiq Khan, who is I got to know some of the perspectives of people that work in the London Assembly when I went there to interview them. But I would like to hear your perspectives. You, if I'm right to assume, you're famous for criticizing the mayor. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, look, this mayor is an astonishingly arrogant individual who finds it very difficult to listen to other opinions, both outside of and within his own political party. I've yet to meet many people in the Labour Party who speak privately well of Sadiq Khan, because he now has his own personal fiefdom which he largely runs according to his own whim. And we can see only this week he's decided to go on the jolly to the African continent in order to, as he says, drum up business. I haven't heard much of him talking about business actually online. But there's all sorts of issues. So what's the biggest issue that you'd expect a mayor of London to deal with in London? It's crime. You look at crime over the past year alone. Shoplifting is now 5 times the national average. Theft of the person's increased by 20% in the space of 12 months. And yet this is a mayor that can't stop talking about decriminalising cannabis. Now,
I've heard that debate, actually.
And we can have that debate, and I know there are people in both parties who might actually agree with it. I happen not to, because I don't think it's time for us to be decriminalising anything. I think, if anything, our laws should be sending a clear message that we're getting tough on crime, and not just the causes of crime. It's getting tough on crime that's now the problem. And I think Sadiq's biggest problem is his failure to prioritise. Now, of course, I've criticised him on other things as well. My patch is the West End. He talks a lot about pedestrianising Oxford Street. I think it's a bad deal for businesses and for people in the West End. But fundamentally, this is a mayor with the wrong priorities, and he's been in office for too long, and it's time for a fresh face.
Well, you were able to see the Labour Party from the inside. But what's your impression of the mayor from the outside, as you are entering into politics of the Conservative Party?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And again, I would completely agree with everything Paul said there. And my approach to Sadiq Khan is I've never been a fan of him from the very, very start. I think he's always played his audiences very well, but really not looked after the best interests of London. And just from my own personal experience in the last 13 years since I moved to London, I remember London being safe. I could walk around. Now, if I feel like I walk around Oxford Street with my phone out, I'm always looking for someone
Kind of holding your phone in your pocket.
Yeah, always checking. I'm worried some moped drivers going to grab it out.
It's better to wear jeans because jeans kind of cover your pockets. You know, there's just kind of tips.
Yeah. You hope you'd notice if someone's got their hands in there. Yeah.
This shouldn't even be the conversation at the first place. What you should wear, how you should cover it up, whether you should hold your purse to your body.
Yeah.
When you're traveling in London, it shouldn't even be the conversation.
I think what was fascinating for me, I mean, I'm wearing short sleeves, I'm incredibly hot, so it's very sweating on camera here. But I was over in Singapore recently, and I went to Australia to look at the shows to go out there, and seeing how clean Sydney was, seeing how clean Singapore was, how safe it was. I think, when you stay in the London bubble a bit too long, you get used to you think, it's still a bit of grime, it's a bit of edgy, cool city vibes. Then you realize actually that's morphing into just low-level crime going uncontrolled. And it's that broken glass theory where you let a little bit go, then it becomes more acceptable. And I think that's the thing, perhaps Sadiq Khan. He's sort of got used to the idea that crime is not a problem, and he sort of travels around in everything's car with all the security guards. So I don't think he's feeling the security issues that everybody else is feeling. I think that's perhaps really out of touch, I'd say, with the local Londoners.
In this way, I think he's finding it hard, and the people are finding it hard to relate to him, to understand him, because as somebody is traveling in cars with security, it is hard to understand the problems of the people who are shouting about crime or shouting about other types of crimes, and I think in that regard, it poses a question whether the policies that he is doing, whether the actions towards London are genuinely indicative of his incompetence, or is that, or does he realize that he's doing something wrong, but he doesn't know or doesn't want to change it? So is that incompetence or something that he's doing on purpose?
It'd be nice to give you a neat answer and say it's either one. I think it's probably a combination of both, if I'm being honest. I think perhaps he doesn't have many great ideas about how to fix it, especially since he does sort of quite counterintuitive things, saying nobody should use the tube during COVID and then complain that TfL's run out of money. And well, you can't have it both ways. It doesn't really make sense. And then also his relationship with government. It was very easy for him with the Conservative government to blame everything that was going wrong with the Conservatives. And now Paul wants to know more about it, but the dynamic between him and the Labour government now, he's still trying to play sort of internal politics to deflect from his own sort of failings in some ways. But I think it's probably a combination of being out of touch. I mean, he has been in power for quite a long time now, so perhaps that's inevitable. But I think also he doesn't have the best ideas. But I'm not sure Paul would.
I think there is a complacency there. I agree with Oliver. And essentially, what any future mayor of London needs to be looking at is sending the right messaging from day one. Sadiq's already lost, I'm afraid. He's lost this battle because he's never concentrated on it. But take Kiev as a good example, right? Soon after the revolution in 2014, if you met police officers in 2015, you'd see these new, young, attractive officers who were put on the streets, and you'll remember the news about this, perhaps. I don't know whether you will, Vladimir, but it was all the rage.
They were quite young. They were trying very more.
They were training young and attractive police officers to come into the force, and you'd see very young officers on the beat. I've got a photograph with them somewhere on my Instagram, who were out in force on the streets of Kiev, ready to tackle crime. And the messaging was more important than actually what was happening on the ground in a way, because it was sending a message that something new had happened on the streets of Kiev. And a similar example might be New York, a number of decades ago when the mayor appointed a policing czar. I don't particularly like the use of the word czar, but something like that would be important. And that's what Paul Schroeder as well in the Westminster Council is talking about doing Westminster, appointing a specific enforcement cabinet officer to deal with these issues. Messaging is so important, and I'm afraid Sadiq's just lost the opportunity to drive those messages home.
And you mentioned